Imagine this. You sit in a quiet room, midnight pressing against the windows. A single lamp casts a circle of light on your desk. In front of you lies an ancient text, its pages yellowed and fragile. You expect stories of patriarchs, genealogies, the kind of dry material scholars endure but few savor. Yet, line after line, something gnaws at you. Not the stories themselves, but the obsessive rhythm of a single command: do not consume blood. It isn't written as if it were a reminder of dietary law. No, the words carry weight, urgency, desperation. It feels like the plea of a people who knew what it meant to ignore that command, people who had seen what happened when blood was consumed unlawfully. Here is where I confess something. The first time I stumbled upon these passages, I almost laughed. Vampires, in scripture. It felt absurd. But as I read deeper, laughter turned into unease. The warnings weren't abstract. They described restless beings, cursed, wandering, never satisfied. That language echoed not the metaphors of sin, but the ancient folklore of vampires. The realization hit me. What if the vampire isn't an invention of medieval Europe, but a memory that began thousands of years earlier, buried in texts like the Book of Jubilees? If you love exploring ancient texts, mythology, and hidden history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Talesmythology for more mysterious stories from the shadows of time. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next secret uncovered. Tonight, I want to share with you the forbidden truth I discovered. Not a horror story meant to scare, but a trail of whispers preserved across centuries, pointing back to something ancient, something our ancestors feared too much to forget. The Book of Jubilees is often called Little Genesis, written around the 2nd century BCE. It retells much of Genesis and Exodus, but divides history into neat cycles of 49 years. Jubilees, marking the passage of generations. For centuries, Western Christianity rejected it, labeling it apocryphal. Yet in Ethiopia, the Orthodox Church preserved it in its canon. In the ancient Jay-Z language, that survival alone is a story. One culture safeguarding what the rest of the world erased. What makes Jubilees unique isn't just its structure, but its obsession. Over and over, the text repeats warnings about blood, not just once, not twice, but compulsively, as if the writer was hammering into stone a lesson that could never be allowed to fade. Whoever consumes blood, it declares, is cut off forever. Why such extreme emphasis? If this were only about dietary law, the repetition would seem excessive. But framed as survival, it becomes chilling. The law of blood is not about hygiene. It is about life and death. About avoiding a curse tied to beings who once walked among humanity. Think of how modern law works. We don't repeat the obvious, unless the stakes are grave. We don't tell children 30 times not to touch the fire, unless we've seen firsthand how badly it burns. The obsession of Jubilees suggests something similar. Blood consumption was not a distant taboo. It was a present danger. Here lies the heart of the matter. The Nephilim, offspring of the Watchers, angels who descended and defiled themselves with human women. Other apocryphal texts, like Enoch, describe them as giants who devoured flesh and drank blood. Scholars often dismiss these descriptions as myth, exaggeration, or metaphor. But listen to the wording carefully: restless, cursed, feeding on life itself. Does that sound like warriors, or something else? I remember reading Jubilees 7 to 2125, where Noah warns his sons, the spirits of the giants are attacking, killing, and drinking the blood of men. The first time, I underlined it. The second, I sat back in my chair. The third, I whispered aloud. This sounds like a vampire. Could it be that medieval folklore didn't invent the vampire, but inherited its memory? A distorted echo of beings cursed in the earliest traditions. Imagine oral storytellers passing down fragments. In one place, the cursed become shadow eaters. In another, they become the restless dead. In Europe, they become the vampire. The core is the same. Beings once human, now cursed by their relationship with blood. In 2019, I spoke with a priest in Addis Ababa. I asked carefully, hesitantly, whether local traditions carried stories about beings who consumed blood. His answer was not written in any book. He leaned forward, smiled gently, and said, "Names change, but curses remain the same. That sentence has never left me." He did not deny it. He did not confirm it. Instead, he tied the phenomenon to memory, something preserved without needing to be written. Later, in Gondar, another monk told me, "Every family carries a shadow. Some shadows are heavier than others." His tone was not metaphorical. He meant it. There were lineages still whispered about, families avoided after sunset, villages reluctant to marry into them. Pale skin, strange illnesses, nocturnal habits. Were these vampires? Perhaps not in the Hollywood sense, but the parallels were impossible to ignore. The community saw them as cursed, as marked by something ancient and unshakable. And so the command, "Do not consume blood," was not simply a religious line. It was survival, whispered through generations like a charm against shadows. When I first studied the structure of the Book of Jubilees, I thought its precise genealogies were merely clerical, the sort of detail scholars love, but readers skim. Yet as I placed these genealogical cycles side by side, a disturbing pattern began to reveal itself. Every few generations, a phrase appears: defiled, cut off, corrupted. At first glance, these might mean idol worship or moral failure, but when paired with Jubilee's obsessive blood warnings, the language takes on a different tone. It reads as if entire families were spiritually marked lineages tainted by something deeper than personal sign. Imagine being born into such a family. You inherit not only your father's land or your mother's eyes, but a spiritual stain that others can sense. Perhaps it shows up in pale skin, strange illnesses, or an inability to stay in sacred spaces. Your neighbors avoid you. Your children are whispered about. Generations later, your descendants are still judged, still shunned. This isn't merely poetic speculation. Ethiopian oral traditions preserve such memories. Elders tell of families born with shadows, avoided at night, believed to be cursed. In Europe, the belief persisted too. Villages spoke of certain bloodlines prone to rising from the grave. In Jewish mysticism, commentaries describe night wanderers whose descendants could never find peace. The consistency is haunting. Jubilee seems less like a history book and more like a spiritual diagnostic tool, a record of blessings and curses transmitted through bloodlines. Every cut-off family might represent a lineage marked by vampiric hunger, cursed to pass it down. This shifts the vampire from fantasy to inheritance, not a monster who arrives at night, but a curse embedded in blood itself. But what if the vampire is more than a personal curse? What if it's also a political metaphor? Jubilees doesn't only condemn individuals. It also speaks of rulers and nations that consume the people like bread, devour their flesh, and drink their blood. At first, this sounds metaphorical, yet the choice of imagery is deliberate. To call a tyrant a blood drinker is to connect oppression directly with vampirism. Consider history. Think of emperors, dictators, and kings who drained their nations dry. Pharaohs who enslaved millions. Caesars who fed armies with endless conquests. Tyrants who taxed peasants into starvation. Aren't these rulers vampires in their own right? They consume the lifeblood of their people not literally, but politically, socially, spiritually. This imagery persists across traditions. The prophet Micah condemned leaders who tear the skin from my people and eat their flesh. In the 4th century, John Chrysostom preached against governors who drink the blood of widows and orphans. An Ethiopian priest I spoke with put it more plainly. The vampire is not always a creature. Sometimes it is a king. And doesn't that resonate even today? When we watch corporations drain communities, or leaders exploit the powerless, we sometimes describe them as leeches or parasites. Language hasn't changed much. Jubilees had already given us the vocabulary, rulers as vampires. So the vampire is not only a mythic figure hiding in shadows, it is also the face of oppression, political, economic, spiritual. It is a pattern of rebellion and hunger, repeating endlessly through history. Here is where the story turns unsettling, because when we compare manuscripts, we notice something strange. In the Ethiopic Jay-Z version, the The descriptions of blood hunger are explicit. Giants lust after flesh and blood. The command against blood is tied to survival. But in Western fragments Greek, Latin, later translations the language softens. Blood consumption is replaced with uncleanness. Words like devour become vague moral terms. Why? Why soften the text? Scholars suspect deliberate redaction. If church councils were shaping canon in the 4th century, perhaps they found the vampire implications too dangerous. After all, acknowledging cursed bloodlines and restless spirits would raise troubling theological questions. Easier to erase the language, dismiss the stories as superstition, and reframe Jubilees as irrelevant. But Ethiopia never erased it. Their version remained intact. A monk in Gonda told me bluntly, "The West hides what terrifies it. We have kept the words as they were given." This divide is telling. In the West, we inherit vampire legends through folklore, divorced from scripture. In Ethiopia, the same imagery is preserved within sacred text. To traditions, one silenced, one unafraid. It leaves us with a haunting possibility. The absence of vampires in mainstream biblical tradition is not proof they never existed. It is proof their existence was too threatening to record openly. As I kept rereading Jubilees, I noticed another layer. The warnings about blood don't just look backward. They look forward like fragments of a prophecy scattered across the text. Take Jubilees 10. God allows a remnant of the spirits to remain on earth to test mankind. That phrase chills me. It suggests that even after the flood, even after binding, something remained, something restless, still hungry, still walking through generations. Later traditions picked this up. The Zohar speaks of Lilith and her offspring wandering until the end of days, their hunger for blood unfinished. Ethiopian commentaries claim certain spirits of the Watchers can only be destroyed at the final judgment. Medieval Europe told of the cursed dead rising at intervals until their curse was fulfilled. What unites these is a terrifying pattern. Blood curses do not vanish. They resurface. In new generations, new places, new guises. Think of it like a disease dormant in the bloodstream. It may go silent for decades, even centuries, but it never fully disappears. Then one day, it returns. Jubilees suggests vampirism isn't just a story, it is a sign, a recurring reminder that the rebellion of the Watchers has not yet ended. What convinces me most is not just Jubilees, but how its warnings echo across the world. In Mesopotamia, the Achaim spirits were restless dead who wandered for lack of proper burial, thirsting for the blood of the living. In Jewish mysticism, the Shadim were spirits of violence tied to bloodshed. In Slavic folklore, the vampire rises from cursed families. In Africa, oral traditions describe shadow eaters, different names, same image, pale, restless, bound to hunger. Can so many cultures invent the same curse independently? Or are they remembering the same ancient trauma? To me, it feels less like invention and more like memory fragments of a story too terrifying to forget, passed down in whispers and myths until the word vampire gave it a name. So what do we do with this forbidden truth? Do we treat it as legend, shrugging it off as imagination? Or do we listen carefully, humbly to the warnings still echoing from Jubilees? The lesson is not to fear the night. The lesson is to recognize the patterns of hunger, spiritual, political, personal, that drain life from humanity. The vampire is not only a figure in folklore, it is rebellion given form. It is tyranny disguised as leadership. It is addiction that consumes generation after generation. When Jubilee says, "Do not consume blood," it is not merely dietary law. It is a warning against stepping into a curse that devours both body and soul. And perhaps this is why vampire legends refuse to die. They are not simply stories. They are warnings. Warnings that remind us to guard our communities against oppression that drains us dry, to resist temptations that enslave rather than free, to remember that rebellion against what is sacred always carries a cost. When you next hear a vampire story, ask yourself, is this entertainment or is this memory? Because if Jubilees is right, the vampire is not fiction at all. It is history written in blood, a scar left on humanity by the first spiritual war. and the scar, like the warning, is still with us.